Back in 1990, I had 10 years of carpentry experience under my belt. I had installed a lot of windows, and doors, and cabinets, and I had used a lot of wood shims. We carpenters use a lot of wood shims. But I had never made a shim. I was a carpenter who worked with wood, but I had never made a shim. I don't know if it even occurred to me that I could or perhaps should make a shim. They were always bought from the hardware store in bundles. But in 1990, that was the year that I got this issue of Fine Home Building magazine. I got all the issues back then because this was a great magazine in its day. It still is, but it's not what it once was. And on page 26 in the tips and techniques department, there was an idea for making a jig to cut shims. It was by John Kraft, Oakland, California. And I looked at that and I said, I'm going to do that because it looked pretty simple. And it is pretty simple. And this is the jig that I just made a couple days ago. I'm going to show you a close-up of this. It's pretty simple. I made it out of scrap wood. It took me about 5 minutes to make. I've made them before in the past. That isn't my first one. Since 1990, I've made most all of the shims that I've used, one working in the trades and here on my home. This is my home edition. And from my interior framing work here, I have a lot of scrap 2x4s, short pieces. So I decided I'm going to just run those through the table saw using this scrap wood jig and get my shims. Now, the beautiful thing that you need to know about making your own shims, the whole reason to make your own shims is they're better, a whole lot better than anything you can buy in a store. They're better because they come to a point. There's no thickness on the pointy end. And every shim I've ever bought from a store, it's thicker on the end here. And that's not ideal. Let's put it that way. The other thing about making your own shims that is pretty nice is that you can make them custom. You can make them any length you want with this jig, and you can make them any thickness on the butt end that you want. This particular shim size right here, which I made a bunch of, and you're going to see, is 8 inches long. That's scrap wood, 2x4 scrap, and it is 5/16 inch thick on the butt end. Okay, real quick, this is a 2x6 right here. I had a piece of that 17 inches long. I didn't bother cutting it down. It's 17 inches is just fine. Got a 2x4 little push handle here. It's held on with 2 screws through the bottom. And this notch, our critical component, is 5/16 here to nothing. I made this notch with my jigsaw, and it really didn't cut very straight. They rarely do with something 1.5 inches thick. So I had to kind of touch it up with a chisel to get it just right so that it cut the shim to the size I wanted. It didn't take long. It ain't pretty, but the shims are pretty. The shims are pretty. And here at this piece of plywood, a scrap of plywood I've screwed on to help hold the 2x down the scrap wood as it goes through. So now I'm going to show you a clip of how I use this to cut shims outdoors in my backyard. But before I do that, I just want to say something about safety. That's the responsible thing to do. The saw that I'm using, it's a vintage. Everything I own is vintage anymore. It's an old Makita table saw. There's no splitter. There's no guard. Okay, and I'm comfortable with that. I'm not saying that you should be comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with it. I'm comfortable with everything I show you in this video. I feel safe. I understand the dynamics of kickback, how dangerous it is, and how it happens. If you look at this video and you think to yourself that that's not safe, I would never do that, well, then never do it. Seriously, don't do anything that you don't understand how to do it safely. And if you don't understand table saw kickbacks, don't do it. Just don't do it. Buy your shims in the store, okay? This is safe from my perspective with my experience. One more thing I want to say. At the very end of this video, after the demonstration of cutting the shims, I have put a scan of John Kraft's idea directly from the magazine. That's at the end of this video. You can read what I read back in 1990, the genesis of this idea for making your own shims.